The biggest stories we track for you over the course of this week. On the local front now, following the rise in food and energy prices, the International Monetary Fund is projected that Nigeria's inflation rate will rise to between 18 and 22% this year. And Nigeria's external reserves also hit a 7-month low after falling to $38.57 billion as of last month. That's according to the latest report from the Central Bank of Nigeria. And now, still staying with a report from the CBN, the Apex Bank has agreed to leave interest rates at 5% per annum for critical sectors and manufacturing industries until March next year. And now, looking at some of the biggest stories from the international front, the European Union leaders, in a fresh development, have agreed in principle to cut 90% of all imports from Russia by the end of this year, resolving a deadlock with Hungary over the bloc's toughest sanctions yet on Moscow since the invasion of Ukraine 3 months ago. And looking at the state of the German economy, retail sales fell more than expected in the month of April, as consumers also feel the bigger pinch of higher prices, especially for food, and retailers also face supply problems from the China lockdowns. The Federal Statistics Office, in its report released earlier within this week, shows that retail sales were down about 5.4% on the month in real terms. Russian manufacturing activities also expanded just last month after 3 months of contraction, and price pressures eased notably, but sanctions continue to dent client demand. The S&P Global Purchasing Managers Index rose to 50.8 basis points from 48.2 basis points in the previous month. And Swiss financial market supervisor FINMA has extended through August a ban on the Swiss arm of Russia's largest lender, Sberbank, from making payments and transactions, as well as other measures designed to protect creditors. Well, it's now time to bring you special packages prepared by our correspondents here locally.
An agreement signing ceremony on the concession agreement of the $3.2 billion e-customs project. The project, to be implemented over a 20-year period, will enable complete automation of customs processes and procedures.
Import and export will be completely digitalized, and therefore the human factor, which is one of our bane in the course of doing business, will now be removed. And doing that will not only enhance the process, but also sanitize the process.
The Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Commission, ICRC, is responsible for undertaking due diligence and conduct of full negotiations with the consortium. This is alongside the full business case approval by the Federal Executive Council. It says the parties are now ready to execute and implement the project following the final vetting of the concession agreement by the justice authorities.
I urge the concessionaire to ensure to the best of their ability the full implementation of the terms of the agreement, as we will be monitoring it from time to time to ensure that both parties comply with it. We pray and hope that whatever we do will lead to a better Nigeria for us and our future generations.
Parties to the project's execution say it shall be done in line with best practices.
We are ready to deploy. We have started liaising with the Nigerian Customs Service. We have put implementation process in place. We are setting up a small subcommittee consisting of Nigerian Customs Service, who are we, and we have the finance in place, which is very important. We have AFC here. We have a secretariat that will start operation.
The Customs says revenue for this year has been impressive and is optimistic that the project will help push up these figures higher.
From the January to date, the minimum we have generated is 210. The maximum we have generated is 225 billion a month.
The Customs says digitalization of its trade processes helps push up trade in 2021, leading to a revenue high of 17.2% above 2020's figure.
Constant feature in the records of the Nigeria Customs Service showcase of goods impounded for different infractions. The acting controller, Federal Operations Unit Zone A, Hussein Ejibuno, says that smuggling is not abating because Nigerians are encouraging it. He explains that smugglers are now deploying ingenious ways to smuggle on land and water.
They will always use ways and means And as they are using it, we are getting them. Look at the two Dangote trucks you are seeing here. There's a particular one that sand was mixed with rice. Now, you will now think that maybe the Dangote is taking sand somewhere. But on credible intelligence, the officer insisted that the vehicle must stop. And when it stopped, the driver just don't jump down and run away. When they climbed on top, they saw sand and see under see rice. The vehicle you are seeing behind me, you see PMS inside, they put sand on top. So that's an ingenious concealment.
Other contraband goods intercepted include containers of unprocessed wood, about 50,000 liters of premium motor spirit, bales of used clothes, compressed cannabis sativa, and truckloads of stuffed used tires, which are absolute prohibited items.
This tire was manufactured 10th March 2017. And now having a 2017 tire in Nigeria that has been used outside Nigeria, you can better imagine what it will be. And no one could either know whether it is winter or summer tire. Then another very serious disadvantage is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 5 in 1. Now look at the way and manner it was packaged. Now the threading inside and the wire inside, as it is being rammed together like this, you can imagine it will start cutting. And the moment it cuts, it cannot move on together again. The next thing is for it to burst.
While noting that more than 64.2 million naira was recorded through demand notices, he reveals that the duty paid value of the seizures made is 818.1 million naira.
Well, it's now time to bring you the feature on the show today as we take a look at the bigger scope of the aviation sector through the lens of the latest development around the pricing of aviation fuel and the pattern we've seen so far from the start of the year up until now. We'll definitely bring you details of this and much more after the short break. Many thanks for staying with us. Let's now deal with the crux of today's discourse. The availability and affordability of aviation fuel remains a burning issue with numerous reactions over the state of affairs in the sector here in Nigeria. Now, as the economy inches to the half-year mark, I'm being joined by Chukwuemeka Chum virtually. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services Limited. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, David. Always a pleasure.
Let's now start our conversation with this big scope where we've seen quite a fluctuation in terms of the pricing and the rally in terms of the global oil market. The hike in aviation fuel definitely is been exacerbated by the Russia-Ukraine crisis. What do you make of all of the reactions around the pricing from the start of this year up until now, the half-year mark, where we've also seen this increased pressure just to bring down the cost of aviation fuel? That has been one of the most burning issues in the sector here. At the last meeting chaired by the Speaker of the House, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, it was agreed that 6 million litres of Jet A1 fuel would be made available through the intervention of the CBN governor at a rate of 480 naira to the operators. What's your thought on all of the back and forths up until the developments of today?
Well, David, it came as a bit of a shock. And, as you mentioned, the uptick in Jet A1 prices we've seen locally, has had a lot of interactions with, the global realities, the Russia-Ukraine crisis having a direct impact on the price of both refined and unrefined crude oil. Locally, we've seen a lot of interventions from the Joint Committee of the CBN, the NNPC, the AON, and as well the regulatory authorities, which are in charge of regulating the dispensing of Jet A1 locally. But these interventions, David, have not really been able to bring any solid respite because, as you know, Jet A1 has since been deregulated, and the prices are mainly a reality of the demand, supply, and other factors that are affecting the prices of Jet A1. So it will be very difficult, David, to have a government intervention. What we've only seen is government try to open up the pricing spectrum so that the public, or I mean the consumers, which are the AON, are able to determine that the pricing calculations are as transparent as possible. We've also seen initiatives such as the government granting licenses to the AON for them to source and import their own Jet A1. But I mean, on the counter side, you will see that the CBN also made a statement that they are not able to provide the forex window for airlines or anybody else to access at the official CBN rate in order to import Jet A1. So, well, David, there's been a lot of talk, but the truth is, Jet A1 is directly affected by all of the global interacting realities, and it will be very difficult to have a lasting solution, David.
And now looking at the scope of license issuance, that's one of the highlights we've seen within the sector in the first 2 quarters. Looking at the import of aviation fuel, bigger airlines like United, Delta, they buy their fuel sourced for this commodity from all marketers and independently look at how to get this at relatively cheaper prices. Do you think our airlines here have that capacity to follow up with this talk of license issuance for airlines to get their own fuel? Do you think we have the capacity here?
I mean, we've heard robust talk from the AON about the capacity to be able to import, their own fuel. But I mean, David, aviation fuel is a huge investment from a capital point of view and from an OPEX point of view. You don't just buy fuel and store them in a jerry can. They are licensing, they are dispensing requirements, their storage requirements, and all of these, come down to capital investments. I believe sincerely that, the AON has made a case to have their own, licenses to import. And I do believe that that is a medium to long-term option rather than a short-term option. You're not just going to import fuel overnight and start dispensing it. Well, yes, the NNPC has directed, or the House of Reps have directed the regulatory authorities to issue waivers to airlines that are interested in sourcing for and importing their own fuel. But David, it is not something you jump into without a business plan. It is not something you jump into without a forecast. But it seems to be that's what the airline, the AON, has been clamoring for. But I really don't think that, David, that is a short-term solution.
And now re-strategizing is one of the biggest words for airlines at this point in time, because it's quite difficult to also have to maneuver through this terrain just because of the dollarized feature we have here in the country. How do we get much more fuel efficient aircraft? Bigger Airbus original jets that aren't necessarily fuel efficient, and what we have here, what do you make of the scope of now having this shift? We initially had talks around smaller aircraft, but how big of a conversation do you think fuel efficient aircraft are today?
Well, David, even beyond the conversation of fuel efficient airplanes, the airlines have to go back to the books. I know that my proposal here is not going to be a short-term solution, but the airlines have to start to substitute naira revenues for dollarized revenues. The airlines have to start to look at their playbook all over again. 90% of the flights that the airlines in Nigeria are operating are point-to-point, localized Nigeria flights, all bringing in naira revenue. That's not a sustainable business environment, David, because as you know, a huge percentage of that revenue component, a huge percentage of that cost component is dollarized. So the airlines have to start to look at ways of dominating, on the West African routes and also become continental players, David. We have to start to look at airlines investing in their own airports, investing in their own hubs, investing in their own hub and spoke systems. And then hopefully, with this business model, David, the airlines can actually start to attract their own dollarized revenue rather than depending perpetually on the CBN to help with their dollarized costs. So I mean, beyond the conversation of fuel efficient airplanes, I mean, David, we also have to start to look at the airlines operating routes that can attract USD. And of course, I do believe that with the recent focus of the Ministry of Aviation into privatizing the airports, the airlines have to start incorporating these initiatives into their business plans. I ideally would like to see an airline buy an airport somewhere, in any state in Nigeria and make it its hub. And from those points, you could operate, routes that can attract USD revenue. The issue here, David, is that all of our revenues are a lot of our revenues are naira components, while we have, huge dollarized cost components, David. With the current slide, with the naira and the USD, David, is always going to be a problem.
Okay, now let's also look at the quite an interesting scope here, the scope of subsidy or no subsidy for Jet A1 fuel. We'll see what plays out with Premier Motor Spirit. Where lies your stance on this matter that continues to generate diverse reactions? We're looking at a deregulated sector here. Do you think we should tilt towards the narrative of subsidy or no subsidy? Your thoughts?
No, David, we can't go back to the days of the socialist environment. The aviation industry, I mean, the most successful aviation industries have operated largely in capitalist environments, and I would say a big no to subsidy. I mean, David, with these shocks, really, yes, I know it is very difficult for any business plan to be able to hedge, against this kind of optics. But David, the solution is not going back to the days of subsidy. We do not have that. If even the government itself do not even have the financial capacity to carry, subsidy, especially in the aviation sector. We're all talking about the issues with subsidy in with the regular PMS. But David, bringing in subsidy again into the aviation industry is, I think, for me, it's just a step in the backward direction.
And also, uniform pricing, according to some, is not a workable plan. And also, the uptick in the pricing of aviation fuel will definitely have that ripple effect on passenger traffic. How much of an impact do you anticipate this would also have on the sector, especially at a time where we're seeing summer travels in sight and also electioneering activities here in the country, which would also have increased movement of people?
So first of all, David, I am 100% against uniform pricing. I do not believe that is the way for the industry to go, because every investor has its own operating realities. Every investor has its own, every airline has its own operating realities. So I'm not a proponent for uniform prices. I believe that every airline should be allowed to fix its costs according to its own operating realities, its source of investments, its operating, both variable and fixed operating costs. Every airline should be able to fix its own prices. However, back to your question, I do believe that this has had this uptick in pricing has had a downtick in demand. We have seen a slight reduction in the demand space. Of course, with prices now averaging between 50 and 58,000 for a next day ticket, that has had a slight impact in the demand space. But David, the travel market here is very resilient, and the fact that we have contending issues with insecurity on the roads, and aviation being the one and only sure guarantee of getting to your destination safely. It is expected to have that rebound, back again. The summer travel period is around the corner, and I do believe also that the political season, which has an attendant effect on the demand space, is also around the corner. So the rebound is not too far away, and I do believe that in the coming month or two we should see an uptick in the demand space for air travel, David, regardless of the headwinds that we are facing with Jet A1 and all whatnot.
Lastly now, let's wrap up our conversation with your forecast of the interplay we are going to see on the global front. We've had quite interesting disruptions here for the aviation sector. We saw COVID and now the Russia-Ukraine crisis curveballs. What's your forecast for the prospect ahead and the need for the mindset of a storm is coming? This really has been clearly illustrated by the transition we've seen from COVID and now to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. It's definitely teaching us not to get too comfortable, wouldn't you say?
That's a bit difficult to forecast, but I do believe that a lot of investments in the technology space are now going into biofuel. We are seeing a lot of testing, and this is also in preparation for the decarbonizing the aviation industry. I believe Delta and United Airlines are at the forefront of testing, biofuel substitutes as against the regular, carbonized Jet A1. So of course that will offer some protection when it comes to issues with Jet A1 and propulsion systems, but that's still a little bit in the future, David, before you can have worldwide certification. As well, the issue of electric airplanes is also being bandied around. And these are all initiatives to win the industry a little bit from carbonized energy. But in terms of preparation, David, for me, locally, the first thing is our Nigerian airlines have to start to think of introducing dollarized revenue into their playbooks, David. We cannot continue the same point-to-point Naira-based revenue, David. If we want to be successful, if we want to be strong, the Nigerian airlines need to start having a huge dollar base. And for you to do that, David, we need to start to think about connecting Africa and the world in Nigeria. I am sure that the airlines are thinking about this as well, because, David, the Naira flights are just not working anymore, David. It's just not working. So back to your question, David, I think, it's difficult to tell into the future, but, seeing from institutional memory, David, this is what my advice would be, David.
Thank you so much for your time on the show today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, David. Always a pleasure here.
Well, just before we go now, here are graphic details of the Nigerian company income tax for the first quarter of this year, as prepared by the National Bureau of Statistics. And on that note, that's it in this edition of Business Week. Many thanks for watching so far. I'm David Alabi. Do enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.